On today's show, we break down the top 32 on our recently released Elite Prospects April rankings.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we are delving into our recent rankings here that just got released today. They will be linked in the description down below alongside the entire recording of our meeting that was clipped by David St. Louis. Not everything is included in there, but there's a lot of content to still dig your teeth into if you want to listen to the debates that we had there in our meeting. But today, we're going to be breaking down the first round on our board, kicking it off with the top 10 in the first segment, and then moving along through the draft as the episode here goes on. But this is a fascinating draft class, and I think it was a very interesting one for us to rank, especially because there's a distinct cutoff in skill that we've been talking about on the podcast here for quite some time now, around that 25th overall range in the late first round. And then there's a tier of talent that extends from that late first to the late second, maybe even arguably early third round, where you kind of get into the glut of second round caliber prospects, the B grades for us on our board. And there's a lot of them. So you're really splitting hairs for a lot of these rankings. And for that reason as well, we're going to be digging into the rest of the board outside the first round on tomorrow's episode. But for today, we're just going to be focusing on the top 32 because that's already more than enough to focus on for a single episode. So let's just get started here right away because I have 32 players to talk about in this show. And kicking it off at number one, there was no debate in this meeting. It's been pretty entrenched for us as a scouting group that Matthew Schaefer is our number one player in this draft class. The one other player who has gotten some number one votes and who I also personally would very much consider if I were picking at first overall, Michael Misa. Those are the two clear top two talents in our eyes with just how good they've been this season with a combination of high-end tools, high-end intelligence, mature habits on both sides of the puck, and overall just taking really big steps in their developments this season. That's trending in a really, really good direction. So two very, very interesting talents there at the top of the draft class. Number three has also actually put some distance between himself and the pack based on our voting amongst our scouting staff to determine kind of like the broad outlines of what our board was going to look like. And Porter Martone is really, really solidifying his grasp there on number three because of his high-end physical tools, the violence that he's able to show, and like we're able to project that into a more pragmatic and useful kind of physical game where he's doing the smaller details physically rather than just the big hits. At this point, that's still a bit inconsistent, but we really believe in his ability to get to that spot down the road. And he just possesses such high-end playmaking ability, the handling skill, the dynamism. I don't know if I'd call it fully dynamic because there's still an element of pace that's lacking, but both of those things have gotten significantly better as the year's gone on. He's become more and more confident with the puck on his stick, and just beyond confidence, he's also just become more calculated and a bit more simple and straightforward rather than trying to do too much with the puck on his stick. And those are elements in his progression that we've really liked, but there's still elements that are some question marks. So Martone's a very interesting prospect in this year's draft. He ended up at number 6 on the Central Scouting North American Skater list, which is indicative of being about like a 7th or 8th overall draft selection. That's the lowest that I've seen on the big boards here this season. So we're going to keep an eye on if Martone's stock is falling a little bit in the eyes of NHL teams. But for us, he's doing the opposite. He's climbing, if anything. At number 4, James Hagens. This is a fall, yes, but it's not a catastrophic one, in my opinion. He's still a very, very, very dynamic and interesting player that is a very easy player to kind of see in a top 6 capacity in the NHL someday with just how much pace and skill he has with the puck on his stick. He's a highly intelligent playmaker, but he hasn't been the pace setter. He hasn't been the offensive driver this season, which has been a big element of critique on his game, also including in our scouting staff. But there are also counter arguments there of he's surrounded by players like Ryan Leonard and Gabe Perreault this past season. Of course, he wasn't going to be driving the offense compared to these guys who were 2 years older and just so skilled. I think that also makes sense. So for me, I think Hagens is still pretty clearly at number 3 on my personal board. I still haven't seen quite these upper echelon type of viewings from Martone yet this season, but my sample hasn't been the absolute biggest compared to the other scouts on our team. So find it very interesting that Hagens is ending up at number 4 on our April board. Moving on to number 5, continuing and staying in this kind of top 5 range for us is Roger McQueen of the Brandon Wheat Kings. Really big, 6'5" centerman, has a lot of dynamic skill, very powerful physical frame, and he's still kind of learning how to entirely mesh his soft skill game with his now hard skill in the massive frame, but it's coming together. And even though he did have another injury after coming back with Brandon, which is an area of concern, he hasn't played all that much hockey this season. We still think that this is a player with an exceptional amount of runway in his development, quite similar to Caden Lindstrom last season in that respect, and that projection is something that we'd be willing to swing on very early on draft day. Moving on to number 6, a player that we have all just adored this season. I think to a scout, like every single person that's tuned in to watch Jackson Smith has been really impressed in our team. He's such a mobile, physically involved transition defender who's just shown an increasing amount of flash in the offensive zone, activating off the boards, sending passes into the slot, cross seam feeds, and also getting involved as a goal scorer. He scored 9 goals in like an 11 game stretch at the tail end of the season there for the Tri-City Americans after, I believe, scoring like 2 goals the entire season prior. So player that was really getting more involved offensively as he got more comfortable, and not just that, but really leading the charge offensively. There wasn't the most surrounding skill this season in Tri-City, and he wasn't just getting like secondary assists like other players on better teams are, for instance. And I think that with that in mind, with the physicality, the elite mobility, the defensive awareness, there's so much to swing on with this player. And I think if he falls into that like 12 to 15 range on draft day, a team is going to get a really good swing on upside, who also has a pretty high floor, in my opinion, with that intelligence, that mobility, and that physicality. I think he'll play minutes as a baseline and could easily become a very versatile number 3 defenseman in an NHL lineup with number 2 upside beyond that. Moving on to number 7, an absolute bulldog of a player that I have adored watching as well, Victor Eklund. Actually going to combine this with the next player here as well, because it's the other bulldog of this year's draft class, Carter Behr. And those 2 players at 7 and 8 have just been really consistent elements for us, both in terms of their playmaking threats and driving inside and creating through contact, but that incessant work rate, outworking everyone else on the ice all game, every game, pretty much to a rule. I don't think I've watched a single game of either of these players where they haven't been the highest motor player on the ice. And Eklund's doing that at a pro level in Hockey Allsvenskan with Djurgården, and Carter Behr did that this season in Everett in the WHL, being a really dynamic playmaker at the junior level. But a key difference here is that with Victor Eklund, you have a player who's still playing in the playoffs with Allsvenskan for Djurgården, trying to gain promotion to the SHL for next season. And on the flip side, you have Carter Behr, who is out for the season with a lacerated Achilles, one of the uglier injuries you can suffer. And that is a very clear difference between the two for us right now in terms of risk around the projection. But still, both players are incredibly fun to watch, but beyond that, project as easily middle 6 spark plugs who can score and create, but definitely also have some top 6 potential beyond that. Moving on to number 9, a player that has very clear like middle 6 center potential, Caleb Desnoyers from the Moncton Wildcats in the QMJHL. just a tremendously intelligent player. He's always in the right place at the right time. He's a hard worker. He's physically involved. He hits players hard. He's really grown as a playmaker in my viewings this season, especially in creating through contact and really driving inside rather than just sticking to the perimeter. So he's a player that can kind of combine both like some dynamic flashes of playmaking, but also just a very, very projectable, connective passing game in transition, keeping the puck moving, not holding onto the puck for very long. He doesn't try to dangle through an entire defensive core. He uses his line mates very proactively. So a player I've enjoyed watching this season, and certainly one that we project as a surefire NHL piece. And at number 10, we have a player who's been a really big riser throughout public boards in the last 2 months, going up into like even the top 5. And we really think that NHL teams are going to love this player as well. And that's Jake O'Brien of the Brantford Bulldogs in the OHL. We still have some questions as a group around his projectability. A lot of the playmaking that he does at the OHL level is a little bit low pace, hang on to the puck for incredibly long periods of time, and that's not a luxury he was going to have at any capacity in the pro level of hockey in the AHL, let alone in the NHL, and that's an area of concern. And also just some really poor decisions or just trying to do way too much with the pass. That's been also a feature in our viewings, but at the same time, at his best, this is potentially the most creative playmaker in this entire draft class. The precision, the final touch on his release of passes is just so perfect. And beyond that, he reads play really well. He can deconstruct sequences nicely with little give and goes. And overall, he's a player that has just been driving the offense there in Brantford alongside Nick Lardis. So definitely a player that has some significant potential. And he's 6'2", but 170 pounds, so has a lot of frame to grow into. So a physical game that can still blossom from that, which is interesting to project. But we still have enough questions at the moment to keep him at 10th overall rather than inside our top 8 or top 5 kind of debates. But that wraps up the first segment. In the next one, we're going to be talking about players ranked 11 through 20, including guys like Lynden Lakovic, Anton Frondell, Logan Hensler, and Cameron Schmidt. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keeping you feel fueled for longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for my busy days. Whether I'm at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost, they're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's keep the rankings going here. And again, they are linked in the description down below if you want to go read them. If you have an Elite Prospect subscription, and the draft meeting is also linked below, and that is free to watch on YouTube. So whoever you may be, you are more than welcome to check that out. But let's keep things going here at number 11th overall, because we have Lynden Lakovic of the Moose Jaw Warriors in the WHL, a big, dynamic, and just deft kind of player who, despite being 6'4", is not a player that you would be drafting for the hard skill. You'd be drafting him for the soft skill. He's a really creative playmaker. The handling skill just flows so nicely in with a powerful lower body, pretty good skating mechanics, and overall just getting a lot of dangerous passes to the slot. Really, really like a precise kind of passer as well. So he's a player whose profile we've really liked, especially with the potential of him growing a little bit more into that frame of becoming a bit more physical in the coming seasons. He's not there yet. And again, you're not drafting him to be that player, but he is a player who can learn those qualities for that to be a secondary aspect in his game. The primary thing with Lakovic is always going to be the soft skill elements, in my opinion. At number 12, however, we have a very interesting ranking that I'm sure is going to be far from unanimous from everyone listening to this podcast, and that's Anton Frondell at 12th overall. I also will say he's in my personal top 10. I have him a bit higher than where we end up here on the final board, but there are still enough questions among our team in terms of the lack of dynamism, the lack of implication in transition, that even now, while he's scoring a lot of points in Hockeyallsvenskan in like the second half of the regular season, there's still question marks of just how high his upside can extend at the NHL level. He's physically mature. He's already filled out his frame. How much more runway is there with this player? This is one of the central questions that we have, and think that perhaps he's more projectable as a middle six, two-way, intelligent, goal-scoring kind of center, rather than like your top six, like sniper who can drive the play offensively. But I'll say from my personal opinion as well, I think Anton Frondell is a pretty clear top 9, top 8 talent this season on my personal board. I've really liked how he's adapted his game at the pro level. And while he does have these deficiencies in transition, if you are able to surround him with dynamic players on the wing, I think you're really able to insulate that element of the game and allow him to thrive as a just really, really solid defensive center and a very dangerous goal scorer in the offensive zone. But at number 13, we have another player with a wicked shot, and that's Justin Carbonneau of the Blainville-Boisbriand Armada in the QMJHL, a very, very toolsy player with plus-level handling, plus-level playmaking, plus-level shooting. All the puck skills are fantastic. He's a good skater, powerful lower body. He can play with a lot of physicality as well when he gets angry, but it's a lot more inconsistent. So he's a player who's a real upside swing. And we have him at 13 because we see that clear top 6 potential in his game. But there's enough risk here as well that he's a bit closer to our mid-teens than our top 10, because he's not a surefire NHLer. There is a chance that he kind of becomes an AHL scorer at his max, but we like the upside here a lot. So he finishes at number 13. At 14 and 15, we have a pair of right shot defensemen who play a mobile, reliable two-way game, who we think are quite projectable for second pairing roles in the NHL long term. Radim Mrtka of the Seattle Thunderbirds is a 6'6" right shot defenseman who skates really smoothly and is a really intelligent and aggressive kind of defender. And he's able to layer stick and body very well. I've been very impressed in my viewings of him, especially at the WHL level, but I also quite like what I saw at the Czech Pro level earlier on the season. As for Logan Hensler, massive progression here this season. He went from earlier on the season being very, very passive in terms of his on-puck implications, playing a very conservative, low-event hockey kind of style on both ends of the ice. And he's really, really turning things around here at the end of the season with the University of Wisconsin, where his elite mobility is just influencing every single aspect of the game. He's constantly just matching footwork off the rush, keeping really tight, aggressive gaps, and he's very difficult to shake off for even the more dynamic rush attackers in the NCAA this season. And he's doing so as a college freshman in far from the ideal environment at the University of Wisconsin, where he has 32 points in like 32 games this season, and he's 6th in team scoring. The offense has been difficult to come by, but the late season viewings with Hensler have really shown a lot more offensive activations and using his mobility to deceive and to get to the middle of the ice and to create dangerous chances, which is what we've been wanting to see from this player all season long. So really good progression there for Logan Hensler. And I think he's also a really key, like top 16, top 17 kind of talent this year, who likely goes a bit higher because he's a right shot defenseman. Then we have a couple undersized WHL scorers at 16 and 17 with Cameron Schmidt of the Vancouver Giants and Braeden Cootes of the Seattle Thunderbirds. Cameron Schmidt started the season on absolute fire. His shot, his speed, his overall dynamic qualities are among the best in the entire CHL already as a draft-eligible talent. And he did cool off in terms of scoring as the year's gone on, but still a player that can just completely tilt the ice in his team's favor. And that ability to dominate shifts, take over games, is one that no player ranked after him in this draft class really possesses, in my opinion. He's a player that really can be a difference maker. And while he is a bit more of a theoretical projection at the moment to the NHL, because he's 5'7", and I mean, no 5'7" player has ever been drafted in the first round in the NHL, and we're not really expecting Schmidt to break that streak. We don't think he's going to be going in the first round. We think that he's going to be listed as a first rounder in hindsight, in retrospect, in like 6-7 years time. But he's a real interesting player. Braeden Cootes, on the other hand, has a similarly like high motor and intensity to Cameron Schmidt, but he's a much more refined player in terms of his habits and his intelligence. He reads the game very well. He works very hard. He's shown a lot of inside-driven skill this season as the Seattle Thunderbirds captain, and he's been playing massive minutes for that team, showing a lot of responsibilities, but also just trust from the coaching staff. And it's easy to see why when you watch him play. The motor never stops. The intelligent decisions are constant, and the dynamic flashes have become more and more regular. Then at 18, we have Brady Martin of the Sioux Greyhounds in the OHL, a pretty physical kind of player. He's 6'2", I believe, really good hitter, and overall the kind of two-way center that you kind of want to take your bets on. He's a player that has shown both high upside in terms of the defensive physicality, but also the offensive creativity and the puck handling and the playmaking driven towards the slot. It's not all been like the highest like efficiency this season. He's been trying a lot of things and not everything's been working, but the Sioux's been kind of in a rebuilding or restructuring kind of season this year, and he's had the liberty to do so, and he's often been the main offensive driver on that team when I've tuned in this year. So a player who's quite projectable, shows some upside, a decent amount of physicality, the kind of player that you like taking swings on in the middle of the first round. Then to wrap things up, we have a pair of OHL defensemen here who play very different styles of play. First, at 19th overall, we have Kashawn Aitcheson of the Barrie Colts, the most violent defenseman in this year's draft class, in my opinion. Just a vicious hitter. He kills plays, very mobile, closes his gaps with such aggression, and I think an NHL team is going to take a swing on him earlier than we have him ranked for sure. Top 15 is my guess, and might even be top 10. Then to wrap things up for this segment, we have Cameron Reid, an undersized, mobile, playmaking defenseman who can activate very fluidly, very intelligent, constantly reading and scanning the play, and I think a player that projects very nicely as a second pairing puck mover at the NHL level, with just how dynamic he's been in flashes and how intelligent he's been able to move the puck into the offensive zone here this season in Kitchener. But that wraps things up here for the second segment. In the final one, we're going to wrap up the show with picks 21 through 32. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who delivers incredible results. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day, you get multiple qualified candidates to choose from. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. All right, let's wrap up the show here with a bit more of a quick fire segment, wrapping up the first round. And again, in the next episode tomorrow, we'll be breaking down the rest of our top 75 and honorable mentions rankings. But here for today, we'll just be focusing on this late back half of the first round. So at 21st overall, we have an intelligent playmaking winger, Benjamin Kindel of the Calgary Hitmen in the WHL, the second top scorer among all draft eligibles this season behind only Michael Misa. He's been producing at a massive pace there in the WHL and has basically single-handedly been leading the offensive charge there in Calgary alongside his line mate Oliver Tulk. Those two have just combined for such wonderful sequences here all season long. But with Kindel, what you're betting on is high-end intelligence, being able to just dissect them piece by piece. He's a very methodical player that I think is going to project very nicely to the NHL kind of game where it's headed nowadays, but he's still a bit of a smaller guy, going to have to fill out his frame. He still needs a couple seasons to mature into an NHL kind of body, but I think when he does that, this is a player that could really, really have an impact in a middle six capacity, connecting play, and also having some of that top six playmaking potential if he really hits. At 22, we have Blake Fiddler of the Edmonton Oil Kings, a hyper mobile, highly effective transition defender who's been able to bring a lot of physicality to the equation too. I was texting Smart Surf Scouting on Twitter earlier today, and he gave me a comp that I quite liked for Fiddler, which was basically like a B grade version of Artyom Levshinov. And I see that. There's a lot of mobility, the rush defending, the offensive flashes of activation, but still being quite raw, and all of it still needing to come together in a cohesive package, but the flashes being just really quite blinding at their best. I really do see those similarities. At 23, we have the only goaltender in our first round, Joshua Ravensbergen of the Prince George Cougars, a big, athletic, intelligent netminder who plays a very effective game and is a very easy projection to a starting netminder in the NHL. The actual upside, like we're not talking about perhaps the most elite netminder that we've seen in the last 10 years or anything along those lines, but he's a very solid goaltender, better than anyone who was available in last year's draft, and probably a bit more comparable to like the Trey Augustine or maybe even Jacob Fowler tier of netminder from the year before that, if things really hit for him. At 24th overall, we're heading to the NCAA because Shane Vansaghi is a very violent, very projectable bottom six player who's playing with Michigan State University. He's just an absolute wrecking ball in the offensive zone and in the defensive zone. He's a really, really hard hitter, but beyond that, it's the physical edge that helps him in even just the smallest little details of winning individual puck battles on open ice, little stick lift here, just being dogged on retrievals. He's a very hardworking guy that an NHL team is just going to swing on because he's such a projectable piece. He's going to be playing bottom six NHL minutes starting in maybe as soon as 2 years' time, maybe even less than that, and going for a very, very long time beyond that. We're going to see if the actual like goal scoring from in tight could become something to work an offensive game around and maybe get some power play minutes as well as a net front presence. But even if he's just a PK specialist, even strength, middle six energy guy, he brings a special level of violence and physicality that NHL teams seek and particularly value going into the playoffs. Then at 25, we have our drop off from going from A-level talents to B-level talents. And the first player after that drop is Malcolm Spence of the Erie Otters in the OHL. Physical player who could use to get a little bit more intense in his forechecking and overall on retrievals, because I think that we see him projecting as a middle sixer in the NHL. There's some really nice flashes of playmaking and dynamism, but if it's enough to carry him into a top six capacity, we're just not sure. And we haven't seen the type of evolution in his game that would make him a clear A grade talent so far this season. So he falls into the B grades, but we still see a player that is going to be playing NHL minutes, will not have to wait all that long before making the jump to pro hockey, and overall is just a very projectable talent with some skill as well in that middle six capacity. And now we get to my region at this point. At 26th overall, we have a back-to-back-to-back in the USHL and the NTDP, with Vaclav Nestrasil of the Muskegon Lumberjacks coming in at 26th overall and being my top USHL talent in this year's draft class. He's a physical, violent kind of player who's really, really hardworking defensively and in the offensive zone. And the flashes of skill and the overall handling, playmaking combination through contact and creative solutions to like the improvisational problems that he encounters has been the best in the USHL among draft eligibles for me this season. There's so much to like with just how he's playing already in terms of combination of intelligence and motor and finesse. And if you layer in the fact that he still has a lot of growing into his frame to do, he's like 6'4", 190 pounds. I think he's going to be closer to 220 by the time he's playing in the NHL. He's going to be a really, really difficult customer, and he is violent. He's vicious on the forecheck. He's a really, really intense player. He gets underneath sticks, can pickpocket opponents in the neutral zone, and overall, very, very fun player to watch. Then at 27th overall, we have a dynamic winger from the Des Moines Buccaneers in Benjamin Kevan, who was playing with a broken wrist earlier on the season and was showing a bit more limitation in his handling as a result of that, but now has fully recovered, and the dynamic qualities, the overall just pace along the wing and creativity and the playmaking skill, getting pucks to the dangerous areas in the middle of the slot, so much to love with this player. It was infuriating to me earlier on the season to see him getting called up to the NTDP only to play a fourth line checking role, which he did admirably well because he's a pretty intense high motor player as well. The intensity is there. Still needs to refine defensive reads and overall scanning habits, but those immature habits are going to get refined with time. But the combination of intensity, work rate, and skill is one of the better ones in my region this season as well. At 28th overall, we have Jack Murtagh of the NTDP, goal-scoring winger who's really added a different dimensions to his game here this season. He's become a much more dangerous playmaker. He's able to actually open up goal-scoring opportunities for himself by showing pass, which was not the case earlier on the season because he just wasn't even attempting it. And if he was, it wasn't overly effective because he was a pretty predictable shooter. But he's become a lot more unpredictable here this season, playing alongside Cole McKinney and Richard Gallant all season long on that top line. And I think that he's a pretty predictable middle six scorer at the NHL level who will bring intensity and some decent elements of speed and finesse and goal scoring skill in tight. Then at 29th overall, a very intelligent player at the QMJHL who also has significant playmaking upside, Bill Zonnon of the Rouyn-Noranda Huskies, who is a big body. His skating has gotten significantly better here as the season has worn on. And overall, with his intelligence, with his adaptability, this is a winger who, in the middle of the season, was transitioned to center on the top line of Rouyn-Noranda and just hit the ground running as a subpar skater. And then over the course of the season, playing down the middle, has really refined his stride mechanics and is a lot more agile on his feet than he was to start the campaign. And that's a kind of trajectory in his development that I personally would really like to bet on. So for me, also a very clear, top 25 kind of talent. I think 29 is perhaps at the lower end of his range among our scouting staff. Then for the final USHLer here for the top 32, we have William Moore of the NTDP. And this is a player where we're just projecting into the future. Everything is still coming together, but when it does for him, and it hasn't flashes here later on in the season, he is a really, really dynamic and intelligent player who can deconstruct defensive structures, and overall is just a very, very dangerous player in the offensive zone with his playmaking ability. And more he's been able to initiate contact play inside. And these developments have to just continue over the course of the next 3 seasons until he's able to make that leap to the NHL level, because he's still very lanky. He still has to really fill out his frame. But with the playmaking upside, the intelligence, the creativity, the adaptability under pressure, having a really wicked shot alongside good handling and really good playmaking, this is a guy that I think has a lot of runway in his development in the coming seasons. But to wrap things up, we have a pair of high-scoring forwards, kicking it off with Cullen Potter from Arizona State University in the NCAA, who hit the ground running this season as just a really dynamic forward, playing down the middle quite often as well there in Arizona. And overall, it really paid off for him, having taken the bet to go directly to college hockey rather than staying in the NTDP like he was scheduled to do. And betting on himself seems to be working out very, very nicely in terms of the skating ability, the dynamic playmaking off the rush. I think there's a lot to like with this player. And over the course of the season, his decision-making has also gotten significantly better. He's become a lot more, I think, consistent in the decisions he's making. His teammates are able to actually predict him a bit more rather than kind of getting lost in the fray. And that's a kind of progression that I would love to bet on. But finally, to wrap things up here today, the last player of our top 32 is Nathan Behm of the Kamloops Blazers in the WHL, who's been scoring like mad this season there for Kamloops. And overall, he's a player that whenever I've tuned in to watch him, I've been really impressed with the intelligence, the overall hockey IQ, the reading of the game, the processing speed, but the overall dynamism, the skating ability have always been a bit underwhelming. I think he's going to have to work on those stride mechanics to really project his game as it currently exists as a playmaking fulcrum and a goal scoring threat down low in the offensive zone to the NHL level. But he's pretty big body at 6'2", 198 pounds as a right shot winger. And I think that he's a guy that could really take some big steps in his all-around game in the coming years. But that wraps things up here for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in as always. I'd love to hear from you down below in the comments here on YouTube, what your thoughts are on these rankings. I'd love to hear what you agree with, what you disagree with, what surprised you, what shocked you, which players you are highest on. I'd love to hear about all of your opinions down below. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything you need to know to build yourself a sustainable and competitive fantasy roster. But that wraps things up here for us today. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, I'm your host, Sebastian High, and I look forward to catching you tuning in again very, very soon.